Hi guys, welcome to part 2 of Robert Berdella, and please don't be mad at me, but I think I'm going to have to make this a 3-parter because I don't ever prepare ahead, and the confession is long. So what I'm going to do on this one is give you first some fun facts, and then I'm going to give you kind of a quick overview of when he was a child into an adult, and that kind of will sum up much of the confession of his. And then I will just do a brief overview of the confession he made. And on the next one, I will read the whole confession, leaving out the family part that I just told you about in this one. I promise the third time is a charm, and that one will be graphic and worth the wait. Hi, welcome to True Crime and Coke. I am your host, Eve, and this podcast is about true crime and anything strange or unusual. I drink lots of Diet Coke, mispronounce most names, places, and words wrong. If you like this episode, please consider tipping me so I have motivation to continue, because this is not free for me to do, you guys, so anything is appreciated. If you aren't watching this on my YouTube page, check it out. Some episodes have pictures to go with the story. If I have anything else to bring up, I will add it to the end of the episode, so you can choose to listen to it or not. You're welcome. All links will be in the show notes. So, let's get started. I have a longtime listener named David who actually met Bob Berdella and went to his store. So here is his story. He walked into his store and was just looking around, and he had all kinds of junk, and he kind of thought that he was a spooky guy. I told him that I like witchcraft and the occult. He told me that he was not into that stuff. I saw his skulls in that glass case, and I asked him if he wanted to sell one of them, and he told me that he did not. I asked him, where did you get those skulls at? And he told me that they came from the Caribbean, and I asked him if he ever has any pentagrams or Ouija boards, and he told me that he didn't have anything like that. But he gave me his card and told me that if I was more interested in the stuff he had, just to give him a call. I did not call him, but I did go to the store several times to see his stuff. I bought items in there, but a lot of the stuff is really expensive. That's what I kind of know about Bob Berdella. So just think, David, he gave you his card, and if you were to call him, you could have been one of his victims. Another fun fact was that Berdella was friends with most of the men that he tortured and killed. In fact, Berdella's first known victim, 19-year-old Jerry Howe, was the son of one of the other sellers at the flea market. After Jerry Howe disappeared, his father Gerald, who was, again, a merchant at the same flea market that housed Bob's Bazaar, he suspected Robert Berdella murdered his son. In fact, Mr. Howe reported his fears to law enforcement, claiming the middle-aged man was the last person to be seen with the teenager before he went missing. Berdella was even put under police surveillance, but the authorities were unable to uncover any evidence to charge him with a crime or prevent him from committing future murders. Fun fact, one of his victims, Larry Pearson, bit his penis, and Berdella had to go to the hospital due to it. 20-year-old Larry Pearson, who first met Robert Berdella at Bob's Bazaar and was held captive for 6 weeks and subjected to daily acts of torture, electric shock, sodomy with vegetables, and repeated whippings. Well, he decided he had enough on August 4th of 1987 after being imprisoned for more than 5 weeks. So he bit Berdella's penis when he was forced to perform oral sex on him. Pearson nearly severed Berdella's penis, so Berdella had to go seek medical treatment at the local hospital. Berdella was informed he would need to be admitted for surgery, so he returned home, telling the doctor he had to feed the dogs, and then killed Pearson before going back to the hospital for treatment. Fun fact, the journal or torture diary was 58 pages long. 58 pages. Fun fact, there were 717 pages alone in Berdella's confession. There were 334 Polaroid photos taken showing various men, up to 20, being tortured and sexually abused. However, if you are looking for those photos, you are out of luck, as only about 5 or 6 of them are in circulation. They were destroyed. Fun fact is, a really rich dude ended up buying all of Berdella's house and had it demolished, just because why not? Last fun fact is that when the sex crimes investigator was trying to identify different things in all the photographs when they were still going through them all, and there were no faces in the pictures, but there were arms, the investigator had Berdella do hand displays, like reach out his arm as if he was going to fist up someone's butt and hold his arm in a way if he was going to do this or do that. And this really, really humiliated Berdella, which is good. Haha, I'm glad he was actually humiliated. Now, let's go to when Robert Berdella was unfortunately born. And I probably should do a disclaimer, since there are a few times in this episode that I make fun of Robert Berdella's speech impediment, but I have nothing against anyone who has a speech impediment. I mean, heck, if you listen to me, you guys all know I can barely even say normal words. But since it's Robert Berdella, I think it's okay to make fun of him having a speech impediment. So that's a disclaimer. Nothing against anyone who has one, because I obviously have one. Robert Andrew Berdella Jr. was born into a deeply religious Roman Catholic family on January 31st, 1949 in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. From a young age, Berdella was a loner. He had severe nearsightedness, high blood pressure, and a speech impediment, and that speech impediment was a lisp. And a lisp is a speech defect in which S is pronounced like TH in thick, and Z is pronounced like TH in this. So is would be if, so I think it would be she sells seashells by the seashore. It would be thee fellth by the thee for, I think. His own father would physically and verbally abuse Robert as a boy for his lack of athleticism. Robert Berdella Jr.'s father died on Christmas of 1965 at the age of 39. However, shortly after the death of his father, his mother remarried, and this act was resented by Berdella, who viewed the move as a form of betrayal against his father, which is odd since his father abused him. So as a result, this manifested itself in a rude and condescending attitude, especially towards women, that he would hold for the rest of his life. Berdella became a loner. He started painting, collecting coins and stamps, writing to foreign pen pals in countries such as Vietnam and Burma. They would send him all types of pictures and little antiquities and old art and just all kinds of stuff, which would later on, from approximately 1965, he would begin collecting these artifacts, and this would later inspire him to open his own business in 1982. But by his mid-teens, Berdella had begun to gain some confidence. He had realized that he was gay, and though he kept this as a closely guarded secret, it gave him a level of self-assurance. In 1967, Robert Berdella graduated from high school in Ohio and started attending the Kansas City Art Institute. In college, he was finally able to express himself and was open with his homosexuality. He wanted to become an art professor. His first year at the Kansas City Art Institute, he was considered a talented student, but by the second year, he began to change and became acquainted with students who supplied him drugs, and then he would sell them to other students and make some money. In addition, he also began abusing alcohol. He also engaged in animal torture on at least 2 occasions while at the Kansas City Art Institute, claiming them to be art performances. During one of these instances, he decapitated a duck in the presence of his peers. And in the second instance, he experimented with sedatives and tranquilizers on a dog. Berdella was arrested twice during his second year of college for drug-related crimes. Once for selling amphetamines to an undercover cop, and another for marijuana. Berdella was given a 5-year suspended sentence for his crimes. When he was 20 years old, Robert Berdella dropped out of art school and devoted most of his time to working as a chef at various restaurants in Kansas City. He also bought a home in Kansas City, Missouri in 1969 and filled it with oddities and antiquities that he had purchased or acquired by trading things with other like-minded collectors and things he received from his pen pals. However, his collection began to take over his 3-story home, and that is when Berdella got a booth at Kansas City's Westport Flea Market in 1970. The shop, which he called Bob's Bizarre Bazaar, sold a range of items, including drug paraphernalia, shrunken heads, and books on the occult. It also introduced him to a number of different people, including some of his future victims. Okay, and now it's time for a quick overview of the confession. I'm sorry it's not the whole thing. I will have that out soon. The prosecutors agreed for a plea deal for life imprisonment without the death penalty, and the deal was for Robert Berdella to confess under oath what he had done and the details, and if there were more than the 6 that they knew about. It was December 13th, 1977, maybe 78, but I'm pretty sure 1977. 2 prosecutors, 2 detectives, 2 defense attorneys, a court stenographer, and Berdella were all seated around a table on folding chairs. It took 3 days for Berdella to give all the information. Here is a quick summary of it. The crime spree began 4 years earlier in 1984. All of the victims had been abused and all had died inside the Charlotte Street house. The first one was Jerry Howell, with whom Berdella had a prior acquaintance. They had engaged in a sexual relationship for a couple of months. Berdella said that he had assisted Howell in paying for a lawyer and Howell had refused to pay him back. Berdella picked him up on the evening of July 4th, 1984, and took him home, where he fed the young man a variety of tranquilizers. When Hal passed out, Berdella had sodomized him repeatedly. He used a carrot or cucumber to continue to assault him, and then bound him to keep him at the house. Berdella went to work and returned that evening to repeat the assault. He injected Hal with several substances to keep him subdued and beat him with a metal rod. At about 10 p.m., Howell died. Berdella claimed that it had surprised him. He had not expected that would happen, and he figured that Hal must have accidentally aspirated his own vomit, which was triggered by the drugs. To drain out the blood in preparation for dismemberment, Berdella hung the body upside down by the feet, and this excited him, so he took a lot of photographs. Then he took the body down and used kitchen knives to cut it into manageable pieces. For some parts, he used his chainsaw. To dispose of Hal, Berdella placed the pieces into bags. He then set them out on the curb, wrapped in several layers of paper and plastic to be picked up on Monday with the trash. He also bagged and set out Hal's clothing and the instruments he had used to get rid of evidence. A week or 2 passed by before he actually sat down and made notes about the incident, and those notes would end up becoming this diary or torture log. The next victim, Robert Sheldon, had stayed at Berdella's house several times and showed up for the last time on April 10th, 1985. On that day, he became a captive. Berdella did the same things to Sheldon as he had done to Hal, but this time he added something, an injection of Drano into the left eye. The idea was to permanently blind him to make him a better long-term captive. He also did more damage to Sheldon's hands with various implements. When it seemed that Sheldon might be discovered by another visitor, Berdella put a bag over his head and suffocated him. That was on April 14th, so he had been captive and subjected to these horrible treatments for 4 long days. While Berdella cut him up in the bathtub and put the pieces out with the trash, he kept the head in a freezer for a few days and then buried it in his backyard. Only a couple of months went by before the next victim, Mark Wallace, stumbled into the viper's nest. Berdella killed Wallace quickly after some experimentation with electric shock. Under questioning about this crime, Berdella considered the influences that might have been a factor. He said that he had seen a film as a teenager called The Collector that had planted a dark fantasy in his mind. This would have been in 1965, and Robert would have been 16. The man in the film, based on a novel by John Fowles, is driven by the need to capture a woman and keep her imprisoned while he develops a relationship with her. Eventually she dies, and he decides that it was her fault. He ponders what he needs to do with the next captive to make it a better experience for him, and then goes in pursuit of her. Berdella said that this movie gave him a framework for feelings he was already having. That September, Walter Ferris asked if he could stay at Berdella's house for a while, and, of course, he found more than he was looking for. While Berdella was injecting and torturing him, Ferris died from either an overdose or from the wrong combination of drugs. He, too, was cut up and placed on the curb. Todd Stoops had stayed with Berdella prior to his eventual captivity, but in June 1986, he came to Berdella's house for the last time. Berdella injected him and subjected him to sexual assault, including shoving his entire fist into Stoops' rectum. Eventually, Stoops began to bleed heavily, which was indicative of a rupture. Stoops developed a fever, so Berdella administered several different types of animal antibiotics. He also injected Drano in Stoops' eyes and voice box and continued to assault him. Stoops never got better, and on July 1st, he died. Berdella cut him up and placed the wrapped body parts in the basement for nearly a week. The last one to die, Larry Pearson, had been a male prostitute whom Berdella said he had met in the spring of 1987. He made Pearson a captive near the end of June. Pearson was more cooperative than the other men, so Berdella did not have to use as much discipline on him. He said that he kept Pearson around as a sex slave for about 6 weeks. He even thought of putting the dog collar on him first, before he had used it on Bryson. But finally, Pearson had apparently decided that enough was enough, and he tried fighting back. Berdella knocked him out to subdue him, and he died. This head he also kept and put into the freezer. At one point, he dug up Sheldon's head that was in the yard and replaced it in the ground with Pearson's head. After taking the skull inside, he had removed the teeth and replaced the skull in the closet. Despite rumors, Berdella insisted to police and later in a media interview that he had not been involved in devil worship and had fed no human flesh or bones to his dogs. On December 19th, Berdella returned to court to officially plead guilty to 5 more murders. He pleaded second-degree murder to 4 of them, but for Robert Sheldon, he accepted the charge of first-degree murder. On October 8th, 1992, Berdella died in prison of a heart attack. For his 4 years of crimes against other men or torturing of other men, he had served just 4 years in prison. And here is some recordings of Robert Berdella while in prison.
Was that you kept detailed torture logs and diaries. Did you?
I kept sheets of paper that I had made some notations on. This is between the mattress and springs on my bed. This is one of those packages containing numerous photographs. And what became to be known as meticulous, methodical diaries. Those pieces of paper in there are these meticulous diaries.
These are the pictures of the more than 200 photographs, some of them of young men, sexual partners, and these are in some ways, and these that we see here are the sheets of paper upon which you made notes.
Right.
See.
This is a copy of one of those pages.
It looks like a loose leaf paper. It does contain information about amounts of drugs and so on. So what is your complaint with the police calling these detailed diaries?
By your evaluation, does this look methodical?
Doesn't look methodical.
Meticulous?
It looks a little sloppy.
They are not bound in Corinthian leather, written on parchment diaries that the media apparently tries to describe them as. The sheets of paper.
How do you feel when you learned that not long after your arrest, the local radio stations, two of them at least, were running a Bob Berdella parody song and were asking people to come to parties wearing dog collars?
Well, I think the newspaper article reported that even the families of the victims were upset by the song. I have never had a chance to hear the song. I had also been told when I first came into jail that the Fox radio station had run a promo giving prizes to their listeners if they showed up at the station in a dog collar and with a leash on. The people here in the institution, the correctional officers, the caseworker, even the psychiatrist, were, I think, surprised to find out that upset me.
And it did upset you?
Very much so.
You recall we mentioned before that there were reports in the Westport flea market where you had your shop that people would say, oh yes, I do remember he had these strange smelling dishes of food, that he had bead bones. And later on there was speculation, at least in the community and in some aspects of the media, that the remains of your victim were somehow being transported and prepared as meals and prepared as jewelry in your shop.
I was quickly able to identify to the police the other dealers in that section of the market where we rotated potluck rather than eat the flea market food again. And that you could question any of these people, and they'd be able to tell you that the food was good. There was nothing suspect about the turkey or ham or beef that was in these dishes.
I want the police to explain why they allow the loved ones of families to die in the convenient area of 10th and McGee.
I don't think any family of my victims or anybody else that has been killed down related to 10th and McGee are going to be happy to find out that their loved one is basically written off by the police as far as investigations go, etc., because they died in a convenient neighborhood. The police knew what was going on, so it's no big deal.
And that accounts for your remark to me, and I don't mean at all to make light of it, that I killed 6, but they, the police, by allowing this to stay open, they killed more.
Yes. This has been something that's been going on for over 20 years, to my knowledge.
It seems to me that you're suggesting that had the police done their job, had they followed the leads, had they really been on your case prior to April 2nd, 1988, they would have caught you, and some of this suffering could have been prevented.
Maybe not caught me. Scared me off, maybe. Prevented things from happening after how? Definitely.
In a way, do you wish they had? There was a report in the Sunday Kansas City Star in December about the dangers you might face after you leave the Jackson County Correction Facility and are moved to another larger prison. How do you feel about reports like that? Do they make you anxious?
They give me some reason for concern, but one of the reasons I'm concerned is that these were not just reports. These were digging out quotes from unnamed prosecutors implying that the inmates down there are waiting to get their hands on me. I am at this point less concerned about the inmates acting on their own as opposed to the inmates or an inmate acting in response to maybe some directive or coercion from some police officers.
Do you think you're being set up, perhaps?
Well, I think the Star and Times have, since they haven't been able to get a court to put me to death, are now trying to get the inmates to do it for them.
Just a bunch of earth is all that's left of 4315 Charlotte. But some people will never forget the house nor the man who lived here. Bob Berdella, Kansas City's most infamous serial killer, is dead. He died in prison after his victims were killed in his home. Berdella confessed to sexually and physically torturing 6 men here. But some believe there were more victims and hope digging up the house might unearth some secrets. That's why millionaire Dell Dunmeyer, who owns the property, had workers carefully tear it down. Private Detective Ashley Hearn was here in 1988 when the truth came out, and he's been here for the past 5 weeks, making sure no other bodies turned up. He says the stairs to the basement will be saved, as well as this drain, reportedly used to carry away the blood of Berdella's victims. Well, this appears to be the final chapter of the Berdella story, and no one could be happier than those who live on either side, who will split the property.
Until next time, have a good evening.